Welcome into the block. I'm Emily Proud. Carl, Reed, and Blake Brockermeyer are here. And now that we have hit the midseason point, not technically, don't get me on a technicality, but each team has played at least 6 games. So it's a great time for some evaluations. Blake and Carl will each pick a Heisman winner, a top non-quarterback, and a most disappointing team. And then finally, we got playoff picks. So let's start with the award for the nation's top player. There's a lot of season left, but right now, ceremony is this weekend in New York City. Who's taking home some hardware, Carl? You start.
Well, I'm going to start with Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker. He's been dominant so far this year. 1,800 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, only 1 INT. Obviously, he had the big win at home against Alabama. Another reason why he has the best opportunity to win the Heisman and should be in the driver's seat, because he will have the most opportunities down the stretch to have a Heisman Trophy moment. Has to go on the road and beat Georgia. Then he has the SEC championship game. If he goes and beats Georgia in Athens and follows that up with the SEC championship win, which would likely be a rematch against Alabama, then he, in my opinion, has to be the guy that wins the Heisman. He is running that offense with remarkable efficiency. He is a special, special player.
Yeah, if all those things happen, Hooker's definitely going to be in the mix of this at the end of the season. Has had an incredible season, and I love watching his game, and he's really elevated the Tennessee program. My pick, though, is C.J. Stroud, Ohio State's quarterback. He has been steady Eddie all season. He's kind of flown under the radar just because Ohio State's kind of had a soft schedule this year after the Notre Dame game to open the season. He's thrown for 1,700 yards. He's thrown at over 70% completion rate. He's got 24 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. He'll have a big moment at the end of the season versus Michigan, and then they play Penn State after this weekend as well in Happy Valley. So he's got two big games ahead of him where he can kind of cement his status as one of the top players in the country, if not the top player in the country. He's going to make a lot of money after the season as one of the top picks in the NFL draft as well.
Yeah, 2 great picks, 2 great quarterbacks. But when we talk about winning the Heisman, there's always some other things that go into it, right? Carl, you talked about having that Heisman moment, that opportunity to play on the biggest stage. Meanwhile, Blake, obviously C.J. Stroud flowing under the radar a little bit, but still spectacular and putting up all of those numbers. Carl, I'm going to ask you straight up. Blake, get ready to answer this too. You need a quarterback to win you a football game. Who you taking?
Well, right now, I'm going to go with Hendon Hooker because he has shown me in the most dramatic fashion that he can lead his team over a big-time opponent. And so I'm going to stay with him right now. If I had to pick any quarterback in college football right now to lead my team to a win, I'm going to take the guy that we've all said also has had the toughest schedule to this point. I'm going to go with Hendon Hooker right now at the University of Tennessee.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with either one of these guys, but I'll take Stroud. I think he's done it for he's got a little more proof in the pudding. He's done it for 2 years now. He's got a lot of weapons behind him. He's got one of the top offensive lines in the country. So I think if I had to pick a guy, it would be him.
We have been blessed with some great quarterback play, so it's no surprise that you guys have picked quarterbacks for your Heisman. That's typically how this thing goes, but I wish there was an award for the non-quarterback Heisman, especially this year. There's so many great guys playing at a high level, and I'm not important enough to enact that sort of change for the sport as a whole, but I do have a little sway on this show, so let's do it here. Blake, get us started with your non-quarterback Heisman.
Well, the award is the Doak Walker Award, so I'll go with Blake Corum, Michigan's running back. He's had an incredible season this year, running behind a really good Michigan offensive line. That won the Joe Moore Award last year as a top offensive line in the country. They might win it again. That would be unprecedented. So he's got 13 touchdowns. He's a playmaker. He is doing everything that you can ask for an elite running back right now. He's got 3 top 10 rush defenses to play this year still. So Rutgers, Illinois, and Ohio State are all right now in the top 10 of rush defenses. So if he can continue this pace for the rest of the season, I think he's definitely going to be in the mix. If Michigan can keep winning football games and beat Ohio State at the end of the season, he's going to be a real factor in the Heisman race, in my opinion.
Blake Corum has been special this season running for Michigan. The offensive line he's running behind right now, I would say they're the best offensive line in the country. It's clinic film watching them play. I'm going to go with Chase Brown at the University of Illinois. He's having a special season for the Fighting Illini, 192 rushes, 1,059 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's a guy that has led Illinois to a 6-1 record, and they're at the top of their division. And nobody expected this from the University of Illinois. And when you watch them play, everybody in the stadium knows that he's getting the ball. He's run with tremendous pad level, tremendous toughness, a special player, will have a solid career in the National Football League coming up in front of him. He would be my pick right now for a non-quarterback to win the Heisman Trophy. He has brought a special attention to Champaign, Illinois.
Yeah, I love Chase Brown's film. He's had an incredible season. I think the biggest setback for him is the logo on his helmet. I think the Illinois logo doesn't carry as much weight, unfortunately, as a lot of the other logos, especially the Michigan logo. So I think that will hurt him. But he's got a chance to prove it just as well. They play Michigan at the end of the season. So if he can go out and ball in that game, then I think he can set himself up as well.
Reminds me a little bit of Derrick Henry with the Tennessee Titans. You mentioned logo, not the flashiest NFL team. You know he's going to get the football. He still dominates. You know that's what this offense wants to do. A lot of glimmers of that. Not going to compare him as a running back to Derrick Henry, but a similar situation there. Blake, you joked that it's the Doak Walker Award. I didn't say it had to be a running back. I'm curious. You know, there's some great wide receivers out there, but from my perspective, we had so much hype around some defensive players as we headed into this season, and it has been silence. I mean, Will Anderson Jr. has not lived up to the preseason hype. Jalen Carter is another guy, too, that we were really expecting to burst onto the scene. So, Blake, what have you seen from some defensive players that, you know, you're left wanting more?
Well, I think just a lot of the high-profile guys, a lot of the guys that we write about and talk about in the offseason that are going to be high draft picks in the draft just haven't produced. A lot of them have had injuries. A lot of the teams, especially Clemson, they spread the wealth out defensively. There's not a lot of huge stats by a lot of these guys. Georgia's kind of always been that way. Jalen Carter's been especially silent this year with some injuries, but he's only got 4 tackles for the entire season, which is pretty unbelievable to me. So I think it's just you don't really know. Everyone's kind of got their different deal, but I think injuries and just offenses, being especially aware of where these guys are, definitely play a part as well. And then you look around offensively, and some of these great wide receivers that we were hyping up in the offseason have been the same way. You look at Josh Downs. He's had some injuries this year. Keyshawn Boutte, LSU's just kind of now starting to get going. Jackson Smith and Jigba's likely going to play this weekend, really for the first significant snaps of the season. So these guys need to stay healthy, but they also have to protect themselves with the NFL draft coming up.
You know, one of the things that I worry about when I watch these guys, and especially as we're going through the offseason, is are guys focused on having great season, or are they coasting towards the NFL draft? I never could have imagined that a Tennessee offensive lineman was going to tell Will Anderson on Instagram that he sucked and that he's not a good football player. And that's what we had. And I was watching the Tennessee-Alabama game wondering, was Will Anderson even in the game? And this is a guy that we talked about being the best player in the country and should be in Heisman Trophy consideration. And he was a non-factor completely in that game. We talked about guys like him not even having to play this season and being the number 1 pick in the draft. At the end of the day, players need to understand that you still have to come out and be a good football player and play big in big games, or as fast as everybody builds you up, they'll tear you right back down to reality, because football is a what have you done for me lately kind of deal.
Yeah, speaking of, not everyone has impressed through the first half of the season. There have been plenty of disappointments, but this is a team game. So, Carl, the team you chose as your most disappointing is Texas A&M. Now, I have to ask you this. In my eyes, a disappointment is a team that didn't live up to expectations set at the beginning of the season. So what were your expectations for the Aggies?
Well, when you hire a football coach and you pay him $100 million, your expectation is that he gets your team at the top of his division, the top of his league, and competing for national championships, especially after having the #1 class in the country, coming off a win last year, being the first former Nick Saban assistant coach to beat them last year when they beat the University of Alabama. There was a lot of hype going into this season on Texas A&M, but right now they haven't lived up to it. Losses against Appalachian State, a blowout loss to Mississippi State, an inept offense. It's been a real struggle in Texas A&M. You have a booster saying that it's easier to hire a hitman than it is to pay the buyout, that Jimbo Fisher have. It's been a disappointing season in College Station, and Texas A&M has some questions that they're going to have to answer this offseason, especially with what they're going to do with play calling moving forward.
Yeah, Carl, Texas A&M was a preseason top 10 team. Most people predicted them in the top 5. They were expected to finish no worse than second in the SEC West. Currently, they're 5th. They're 1-2 in the SEC. It's been a very disappointing season in College Station. So they're going to have to make some changes in the offseason offensively. And they've got too much talent on that roster to be 5th place in the SEC West currently.
Yeah, you said it, the talent on that roster. It's not just the paycheck that Jimbo Fisher is collecting. This was expected to be maybe the biggest and best recruiting class of all time. Is this a situation where we need to be a little bit patient for those guys to get ready, or should it be better than 5th in the SEC West and losing to Appalachian State and getting blown out at home?
Well, I think that they should be in a better position just because Jimbo has been there a few years now. This isn't his first year. I would say that it would be a different scenario if this was his first year on the job. But you shouldn't just be waiting for those freshmen to be able to make plays. You have guys throughout your roster that have been ballyhooed recruits and have been big-time guys. You have guys projected to go in the first round of this NFL draft, and it just hasn't worked out. And you yourself are supposed to be a renowned quarterback coach, and we haven't got super production from the quarterback position. So I think that somebody has to be accountable.
I think most of these young freshmen that they brought in, a lot of them are defensive linemen. It's going to take a little bit of time for them to get going and get ready on the field. This year should be a nice warm-up for them. If they're not making strides next year, then I think you have to really wonder what's going on in College Station. So give it one more year for that recruiting class, see how they develop. If they're not developing by the end of next year, then I think there's going to be a problem. There's definitely a problem in College Station.
Speaking of being patient, Blake, you have selected Oklahoma as your most disappointing team. I'll throw it to you with the same question I did Carl. What were your expectations for this team with a new head coach and a roster overhaul, frankly?
Well, the expectations for Oklahoma is they're a preseason top 10 team, expected to be in contention in the Big 12. They hired Brent Venables, who's a defensive guru. Currently, they're 115th in the country in defense, giving up 40 points or more in their last 3 or 4 games at least. The expectations are at a minimum that you'll make a bowl game, I would think. And right now, that's seriously in question right now. They've got to win 2 games. None of their games left on their schedule, to me, is going to be a gimme. And they're currently next to last in the Big 12. They're 9th place out of 10 teams. So, and 1-3 in conference. So, really, really poor performance by Oklahoma this season, especially getting blown out by Texas, 49-0 a few weeks ago. So, I didn't think Oklahoma would be great this season, but I did not expect that they would be this bad. And they got bled out in the portal after the season, and I expected them to take a little bit of lumps, but to be where they are right now, I don't think anybody saw that coming.
You know, when you look at the University of Oklahoma, I think, Emily, that I have to go back to what you asked me about A&M. This is Coach Venable's first year, and they have a complete roster overhaul. So I do think that you have to show some patience until they can replenish that roster. Blake said that Coach Venables is a defensive guru. I don't believe in gurus in football. What I think Brent Venables is, I think he's one of the best recruiters that has ever existed in college football. And you can tell by the defense that Clemson still has that he recruited, and that his defensive line coach, Todd Bates, also had a lot to do with in terms of the defensive line that Clemson has. I think when you give Coach Venables a year and an offseason to recruit and replenish it, he is a legendary recruiter on the trail. There are legendary stories about him and how relentless he is in recruiting. And I think as soon as you see him rebuild the roster in his image with his kind of guys, I think that you'll see Oklahoma go back towards the top of the standings.
Yeah, Blake, this Oklahoma team, as you said, was a preseason top 10 team. Oklahoma, as a program, the expectations are always to find a lot of success, and more so than other programs. But is this kind of the perfect storm with a new head coach, that roster overhaul, and the fact that the rest of the Big 12, there's been some surprise teams that have, been spectacular this season that maybe we didn't expect?
Yeah, and I think when you lose a franchise guy in Caleb Williams to go with Lincoln Riley to USC, that's definitely a killer, because Dylan Gabriel had some high expectations. I thought he would be better than he's been this season. He struggled with his accuracy more than I would have expected. So he hadn't quite lived up to the hype. Oklahoma's defense has definitely not lived up to any kind of hype. But I do think that they will get it turned around. Like Carl said, I think, especially after having a poor season, I think that they can really go into the portal, recruit relentlessly, and be able to get some guys in there that can quickly overhaul their roster and upgrade it after the season's over with.
All right, let's go to some more positive discussions. It is a good time as ever to do some playoff picks, and I want to start here. I did a little digging through the archives, and before I began working on this show, you guys made preseason playoff picks. Both of you have the same three as you do now: Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. But of course, there are 4 teams, and you each have a new one. Carl, you want to go put on your new favorite hat for this segment? You have the Tennessee Volunteers as your Final Four team. You've traded out a division foe, Georgia, in favor of the Big Orange. And luckily for you, these two play in a few weeks. But before it's decided on the field, why was it decided in your mind?
I think offensively, Tennessee is going to be able to score enough points to beat the University of Georgia. Georgia hasn't been as dominant on defenses as they were last year during the national championship season. Close games to Kent State, close game to a University of Missouri team this year. I think that Hendon Hooker goes down there and scores a bunch of points. And I don't think that Georgia offensively will be able to score enough. I don't think they'll be able to match them score for score the way that Alabama did, because they don't necessarily have Bryce Young. Stetson Bennett is having a good season, but I do give the edge to Tennessee. I think at the quarterback position, they have a huge advantage there.
Okay, Tennessee,
Yeah,
Alabama.
I think
Ohio
the big advantage that Georgia has over Tennessee now is that they've got film of Alabama playing them. They've got a great opponent to watch and see how they played them. I think that will help Georgia prepare for them. But that will be a great game. It's definitely going to be the CBS night game, I would assume, and I'm looking forward to seeing that game myself.
I'm really excited to see Will Muschamp and what he's going to do defensively against Josh Heupel in that situation.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting matchup. I'm not going to say, Blake, that you got bailed out of your bold NC State pick with the season-ending injury to Devin Leary. I did just say that. Anyway, Blake, now that you have Carl's exact preseason top 4, exactly what your friend Carl picked at the beginning of the year, this is what you have now at the midpoint of this season. So first, you need to tell him that he was right, and then argue your case for Georgia over Tennessee.
Yeah, Carl was right. He picked the standard 4 teams that everybody in the country picked. I tried to take a flyer on a team, so that's my bad. I won't be picking NC State again for a long time to win to make the college football playoffs. But But I think I still stand by Georgia. I think that they've coasted a little bit early in the midseason after starting off strong. I like the way that they're playing offensively and defensively, complementary football. They've got the best tight end in the country in Brock Bowers. And their defense plays great as a unit. There's not the standouts that they had last year, the multiple first-round picks that they had, but they're playing great as a unit. And I think that the Tennessee game is going to be huge, obviously, because it's likely to decide who wins the East. And then, the West is still up in the air as well. So there's a lot to look at in the college football playoffs. There's probably 4 other teams that you could put in there as well. So a lot of football left, a lot of chaos to ensue. But I think Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson will end up in there somehow, some way.
Anybody consider, Michigan as a team, Carl?
Well, Michigan obviously is playing well. They beat Ohio State a year ago. So, there'll be a lot of people who feel like we're disrespecting them by picking Ohio State over the University of Michigan. I just can't get past the consistency that Ohio State has dominated that series in. I think last year was more of a fluke than what it is going to be the norm. And I see Ohio State still having the edge over Michigan.
Well, last year, Ohio State's defense was pretty bad. Michigan's defense was really good. And Michigan played at home. This year, Ohio State's playing at home. And I think that's the difference in my mind. I think Ohio State gets revenge. I think they've been looking forward to this game for a year, and they're able to get the win. It's and probably one of the better games of the season.
So excited for that game, but we have to talk about the here and now. If that wasn't enough picking for you, here is a little bit more. Time to make some picks for Week 8, and per usual, let's set the table so you know which games we're picking. We got LSU, Ole Miss, Oregon, UCLA, Mississippi State, Bama, Minnesota, Penn State, and Kansas State, TCU. We also have a bonus pick that you'll have to wait for, and of course, our block locks. We also like to hold these two accountable and keep you up to date on the latest standings. Against the spread, you're an inverse of each other, which means, it's better for one than it is the other. Blake, doing all right. Carl, time to make up some ground, so let's get right into it. Ole Miss.
He's running away from me a little bit.
I know. Hey, we both look great in those. Yeah, you both look great in those photos, though. So you're both winners in my book. Let's go to our first game, though. Ole Miss at LSU. Tigers are the favorite at home. That doesn't surprise me, but what does a little bit is that Ole Miss is a top 10 team. Carl, are the Rebels the 7th best team in the country?
Well, that's debatable, but I do think that Jaden Daniels had a breakout game passing the football a week ago. And prior to that, he looked like an option quarterback playing for Nebraska back in the day, but he showed now that he does still have some juice throwing, and why NFL scouts were excited about him after his freshman year at Arizona State. I think playing at home gets him an advantage, and I think Brian Kelly has his team moving in the right direction at this point of the season. I'm going to go LSU here, 30-28 over Ole Miss.
Yeah, if Jaden Daniels can throw the football like he did last week, I think that there's some cracks in Ole Miss's secondary that he can exploit. I think that this is the best team that Ole Miss has played this year. And LSU doesn't typically lose 2 games in a row at home. I think 2016 was the last time that happened. LSU's defensive line is different than anything that Ole Miss has seen this season. And Ole Miss has been running the football very strongly this year. They've got 2 or 3 running backs that can really put a dent in your defense. But I think LSU can shut that down. I would make Jackson Dart beat me in the air throwing the football. But LSU at home's too much. I've got LSU in a close one, 28, Ole Miss 27.
Whew. It's going to be an exciting 3:30 game on CBS. Well, speaking of top 10 teams, the game of the day, UCLA and Oregon, number 9 and number 10. Blake, for those of us who have written off Oregon since the bludgeoning against Georgia to open the season, what have we missed?
Well, Oregon's Bo Nix is playing pretty good football right now. Yeah. Their offense is clicking. They've got some playmakers. at multiple positions on offense. Oregon doesn't lose much at home. They've won 21 straight. I think both teams are going to score a ton of points. They're both coming off a bye last week, and Chip Kelly has struggled a little bit on the road over the years. So I think this is the best team that Chip Kelly's had in a long time, or at least at UCLA for sure. And I think the last team with the ball wins this game. I think it will be Oregon. I've got Oregon winning in a very close game, 45-42, and that might not be enough points. I think it could be way more points than that.
UCLA is undefeated, and it seems like every single week, no matter how they win, everybody picks against them. And I'm not going to change that today. I agree with Blake. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game, but I think Oregon is going to win this game at home, 49-45.
Okay. Seems like as good a time as ever to also mention the fact no Pac-12 teams in your Final Four. Maybe one of these two squads. We'll see. Vegas sure seems to think the Tide are primed for a bounce back. Alabama is a 21-point favorite hosting number 24 Mississippi State. Carl, what do you need to see fixed from their last game against Tennessee to this one?
Well, you need to see Alabama play better in the secondary, and I think that Mike Leach, obviously a guy that runs the air raid, he's going to challenge them. I don't think that they're going to beat Mississippi State by 21, but I do think that Alabama's going to come back rejuvenated. Nick Saban has always been great in games after a loss. Alabama has always responded to a loss with a high level of competitiveness. I think they're going to be on a mission the rest of the season to prove all of the doubters wrong that say the Alabama dynasty is done. I'm going to go Alabama here winning 30-17.
I would not want to play an angry Alabama team. Blake, there are one too many Brockermeyer suiting up for the Tide these days. We're not going to have you pick it. But from your vantage point, how do they get those things that Carl mentioned fixed in a hurry?
I think it's more leadership on the team. They've got to have leaders step up, be accountable. Coaches can coach, put them in the right position, but the players got to make plays. And Alabama, typically, like Carl said, after a loss, responds pretty well. Nick Saban's kind of owned Mike Leach over the years, and I would not want to play Alabama this week if no matter who they're playing after a loss. They're typically, I think they're 29-1 after a loss in the regular season. So very, very, very tough week for Mississippi State, likely.
It's a pretty good record there, 29-1. All right, rolling along with Minnesota and Penn State. Get this, guys. Of the top 5 running backs in FBS in terms of yards per game, we already discussed 2 of them on this show. That's Chase Brown and Blake Corum. And as we know, the Nittany Lions, very familiar with the latter. Well, look at this. They're getting ready to face another member of that top 5, Mo Ibrahim. It goes without saying that Penn State's ability to slow him down will be absolutely crucial to their success on Saturday. But Carl, can this defense do it?
You know, Mo Ibrahim is a big-time player, the running back coach at Minnesota. Kenny Burns has been raving about him for a while now. And I think that you're going to go into a classic Big Ten game, but Penn State is at home. I think this is the whiteout game for Penn State, if I'm not correct, and if I'm incorrect. And that's always been a crazy environment to play in. And I think that Penn State holds on in a tough one, 28-21 over the University of Minnesota.
Yeah, Penn State's got to stop Minnesota's power running game after being absolutely gashed last week for 400 yards on the ground. That will be obviously the key to the game. And Minnesota has really struggled losing their last 2 games. I was kind of on the Minnesota bandwagon a few weeks ago, but now their quarterback, Tanner Morgan, is iffy after getting knocked out of the game last week versus Illinois. It's a wideout. Penn State's going to rebound. I got Penn State 28-20.
What's changed in your mind with Minnesota? Is it just Tanner Morgan's injury, or are they doing anything different that's kind of changed your opinion of them?
Yeah, I mean, I just think they're not making the key plays. You know, these games come down to a couple of key plays every game, and Minnesota is not making those plays to turn the tide in the game to win these games. So They've got to come out strong. They've got to run the ball, get a lead, take the crowd out of it. If they can do that, then I think they can make it a very competitive game. But if Tanner Morgan doesn't play, I think it's going to be difficult to impossible for them to win.
All right, the top two teams in the Big 12 squaring off. Number 8 TCU and 17th ranked Kansas State. It's a lot of numbers I just threw at you. Here's one more. Horned Frogs, 3.5-point favorites at home. Blake, will they keep it rolling after a comeback overtime victory last week?
Well, TCU's got a very explosive offense, and they're coming off a tough, emotional double overtime win versus Oklahoma State last week at home. Kansas State, on the other hand, had a bye week last week, got to rest, got to work on their TCU game plan for 2 weeks. They're number 4 in the Big 12 in defense. I think that they have enough playmakers defensively to slow TCU down, and I think Kansas State wins a close, great game, 27-26.
This is a really exciting game for the Big 12. Both of these programs playing really well. I think TCU right now is playing so explosively offensively. I think they're tough to keep up with. Deuce Vaughn, though, at Kansas State is a real problem at running back. One of the key stats I saw this week is that Adrian Martinez hasn't thrown an interception this season. And that's wild thinking about where he was at the University of Nebraska. I think in the end, TCU makes one more play than Kansas State offensively down the stretch, and I'm going to pick TCU here, 35-30.
I am psyched to watch these quarterbacks. Adrian Martinez, Max Duggan. I mean, who would have thought that these two would be dueling it out in week 8? Got to keep things even in the standings. So, Blake, your bonus game is Memphis at newly ranked Tulane. The Green Wave are 7-point favorites in this one. Last week, James Madison followed up their first ever ranking with a loss. But how do you see Tulane handling their success?
Well, Willie Fritz is one of the most underrated coaches in the country. He's got it rolling this year. Their defense is playing really well this season. They're one of the top defenses in the AAC. Michael Pratt's had a great year as Tulane's quarterback. I think Tulane's too much for them at home. They don't have a huge home field advantage, but I like them winning this game 33-25.
Blake, every year when the coaching carousel starts to turn, I always ask, who's going to hire Willie Fritz, one of the best football coaches in the nation, regardless of level. He was great at the Division II level. He was great at FCS. He's been great at the Group of 5 level. Somebody at some point is going to take a flyer on this guy, and it's going to turn their program around. I think he could have the same type of impact on a program that Lance Leipold has had at the University of Kansas.
Yeah, and I think, I think this is year 3 for Pratt as a starting quarterback, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, he's taken his lumps early in his freshman year. I remember watching him. He wasn't quite ready. So I think it's time for them to take that leap, take that next step, and just sticking with your guy and having some experience, kind of like Chip Kelly and his quarterback at UCLA. Sometimes it takes a little bit of while for that to gel, and he's got it gelling for Tulane this season.
Yeah, Chip Kelly and DTR have been together for 5 years, so sometimes
5 years,
it takes time. But Carl's defense, there are a few openings this year that could have the head coach headed elsewhere. Well, you guys swept the Block Locks last week. Well done. Good job. Let's keep it going with this week. Blake, I have to start with you here. Ohio State is a 29-point favorite hosting Iowa, and I genuinely thought this was a typo, but you predict the Buckeyes to top Iowa 42-2. Please explain.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa's got one of the better defenses in the country. I can see them getting a safety. Maybe they've got one of the top punters.
Well, 42.
Yeah, their punters punted 41 punts this season. So I think he coffin corners a punt. Jack Campbell gets a safety. They get 2 points out of it. But Ohio State, both teams coming off a bye week, but Ohio State rolls them 42-2.
What is wrong with this guy? Who picks a team that scored 2 points?
I love it.
That'd be amazing.
If
If
you
I
write on
call
the
that
score,
one, that's going to be an all-timer.
if you write on this score, I'm gonna drink a Dr. Pepper on the show. That's crazy. The nastiest drink that ever be made in the world, by the way.
I think you need to slow down on the if this happens, I will do this on the show, because so far, not so great for you, Carl. We've already seen you wear a pretty awesome hat, so now you'll drink what's the nasty drink that you're willing to drink?
Dr. Pepper, the worst drink in the world.
Okay. I feel like we can do worse than a Dr. Pepper, but whatever. Yeah, I said Carl's not invited to Fansville. That's what my producer's telling me in my ear right now. Yeah, come on, it's a drink of college football. Carl, you can redeem yourself here with a pick, a game that could decide the ACC Atlantic. Clemson at Syracuse. You're locking up the team in orange. Which one is that?
Clemson right now, 13.5-point favorite. I think they cover the spread this week against Syracuse. Syracuse has had a great season, undefeated going in, but it's going to stop this week against Clemson. Clemson's going to win this game 35-20. Their defense is going to be a little too much for Syracuse, and DJU is playing big-time football right now for the Clemson Tigers. I'm going with Clemson 35-20. Put your money on it.
Okay.
Syracuse has given Clemson some trouble the last few years with a lot worse teams. So this will be an interesting game to see if Syracuse can keep this close or not. But I would expect Clemson to win this game. Will they cover? We'll see about that.
Yeah, this game is in Death Valley, by the way. This will be Syracuse's second road trip of the season. The first one was at UConn, so slightly different level of environment there. So we'll see how all these games play out. Enjoy all the action this week. That'll do it for us here on The Block. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube page for all things college football all season long. Have a great weekend.